Warning, this video contains spoilers for both Fourth Wing and Iron Flame. I have just finished listening to Iron Flame, which is the second book after Fourth Wing in the Empyrean series, and I have come to terms, I have accepted that I am loving it. And no, it hasn't got those deeper themes and layers, that deeper meaning, but it is incredibly enjoyable, exciting, super fast paced, and I've been trying to work out why I'm enjoying it so much, and I think it's the immediacy of it, the immediate nature of being completely immersed in the main character's thoughts and feelings. You're never bored once, and it's that immediate, instant gratification. So this series isn't epic fantasy, it's not high fantasy, and people who tend to like those things look down a bit on romantasy, which is, if you don't know, is romance plus fantasy equals romantasy. So it's a fantasy world and story, but there's a strong focus on a couple or some of the characters falling in love. But in fact, it is perfectly possible to enjoy both epic high fantasy and also things like this, romantasy. You just get different things from them. So I do love the fantasy bits in it. And with the romance, I think what I was trying to get at in my review of Fourth Wing, when I said it felt teenagey as opposed to more adult-y, was because the characters felt emotionally, if you're talking about emotionally, they felt emotionally immature, and that was discordant with the more explicit nature of and graphic nature of the love scenes. With the romance in this series, I imagine you probably fall into one of three camps, which is either you love it or you find it faintly ridiculous and it just makes you laugh, especially when those sort of scenes go on for a long time. Or thirdly, you find it cringy and embarrassing, and I would not recommend listening to this audiobook with anyone else present, especially people like parents or grandparents, because that would just be awkward and embarrassing. Or maybe it's a combination of all three. You kind of enjoy it, but you realise that it's a bit ridiculous and a bit cringy. With Violet in Fourth Wing, it was all with regard to her feelings for Xaden. It was, I love him, I hate him, I love him, I hate him. And then, of course, they got together in that book. But then it introduced at the end of that book that the distrust, because Xaden hadn't told her a huge part of what he was doing, a huge part of himself. So that was setting up for this book, that because otherwise it would have got boring, because if they were already together and in love, there's nowhere else left to go. So there had to be a reason why they weren't together in Iron Flame. It was from Violet that I can't be with him because I don't trust him, which is perfectly reasonable. But then this is what I mean by emotional immaturity. She then wanted to know everything about him from all his life ever. And that's not how relationships work. It's gradually building over time. You gradually learn things about them. And that's not hiding things from people. It's not withholding. It's just things naturally come up in conversation. Something will remind you of something from your past and you'll tell the story. Whereas if she found out something that he hadn't told her about from his past, anything, she viewed that as his lying, his not telling the full truth. So yes, that was, but it was, in that sense, it was a bit contrived, because that was what was holding them apart, and in order to keep it interesting. And we had a bit of a role reversal between Dane and Xaden. Everything that she had hated about Dane, being overprotective and not letting her grow, now arguably could be said about Xaden. Just very overprotective and just completely focused all the time on keeping her safe, because he's so scared to lose her. But in the process, as she notes, he's becoming Dane. I actually really enjoyed Dane in this book, his growth, his and we could see why they'd been best friends. I liked how they were translating the book together and figuring things out together. And Dane has finally figured out, just let Violet be Violet, and so he was no longer that annoying character that was just stifling her and just not letting her grow and be herself. And maybe actually probably a better match for her overall than Xaden. I liked that as the riders got to know the Griffin Flyers more, and about the Griffin Flyers training and school, that the Dragon Riders gradually realised that the training and didn't have to be the violent, brutal, constant death and peril of their own Bluesky War College, and that there was a different way of doing things, and that it actually didn't make sense to constantly be weeding out or killing off the people who are failing in the War College, because they need those people for other things. The army, they could go into the infantry or scribe or healer, and that was shown when they were learning that at the Griffin Flyers War College, that their initiation didn't involve death. They just fell into the river, and then that was fine. But for Skyeth to become a rider, you have to cross the parapet, and so many people just die then. They fall off and they die. So yes, they're learning that there are other ways, and that it's not necessarily the right way isn't their way. I got very worried for Riddick, because in Fourth Wing, when the person who died was Liam, and we'd got sort of complacent about him not dying, because he'd had a very near miss of dying and previously in the book. So to then him die in the end was a surprise. And so I thought, when Riddick on the cliffs of Draylor, is it, when they were going up that and he got 2 arrows in his side and then was mended and healed, I thought, was that a sign that he was going to be the one who eventually died at the end? But thankfully it wasn't, because I would say Riddick, Imogen, Rhiannon, they're probably my favourite characters. The battle at the end was incredibly exciting and thrilling. I'm glad that the people of the revolution decided to come to the aid of Navarre and Bluesky, even though they wouldn't have done it. The people Navarre wouldn't have done it for them. They decided to do the right thing and be better, choose the better path and help so people didn't die. I loved that we got to see a lot more of Violet's cleverness, and that she was the one who figured out lots of the things, the strategy, and where the enemy, the Venin and the Wyverns, were actually going to attack, instead of the place where everyone else assumed. And with the translation, though, of the journals of the first 6, about how to make ward stones, which she failed at the first time, and I always, from the wording when of the translation of the 6 and the 1, to make an iron flame or whatever, although I didn't work out that it was going to be dragons instead of riders. I knew that, and the 6 and the 1 part was the bit, I thought that was obvious, that was the bit that they were getting wrong, that the 1 wasn't the stone, that it was either going to be another person or, as it turned out, another dragon with Endana. So I wonder what Violet's second signet is going to be. And it was so sad with Xaden in the end that he felt he had to, his only choice that was left to him was to become a Venin, drawing magic from the ground in order to protect Violet, to keep her safe, and that theme of that he'd become completely obsessed with keeping her safe because he loved her so much and was so scared of losing her that he did something maybe unforgivable, but it's just now whether what happens next with him, whether that will become to repeat drawing magic from the ground, the earth, whether that urge will become too much, and that he will keep doing it and so get more and more into that Venin-y space, or whether they'll find a way to combat it, or whether it's a permanent thing. So I don't know where they're going to go with that. The other thing I wanted to mention is trauma, because all of the characters by now, all of the people who've been through Bisgaeth War College or are currently still in it, would be a lot more traumatized. They wouldn't be able to function because most of the cadets don't make it, so they're constantly faced with death, and their own death, as well as all the people in their year group and above who are dying or being killed by fellow cadets. And so I think we see a lot more trauma and inability to function from all of the characters. And then when, after Violet is tortured for 5 days, the only ramifications of that for her seems to be when she went back into a similar sort of space underground with drips and all the earth. Then she felt there was a tiny bit there, but having been tortured for all that time, beaten to the point of death, only to be healed so that she could be beaten again to the point of death, that would have far more of an impact. And maybe we'll see in the next book more of that trauma coming through, but yes, that's the bit I don't find realistic. So I would like that trauma explored more. With Jack Barlow, that was incredibly annoying and frustrating. Why? We just got rid of him. Why would Nolan keep trying to heal him and cure him and mend him? It doesn't make sense, because the college, their mantra is let the the people die who do die, and why would they spend all that time and energy trying to mend the most evil character? So, and I'm not sure if he survived having a whole cliff or mountain dropped on him, whether he, in order not to die, he became a venom in that he drew from the ground in order not to die, or whether miraculously they found his body and he wasn't quite dead and decided to keep healing him. Yes, that Nolan and his motivations for that just don't make any sense. And it was obvious that Jack Barlow hadn't become a good person and turned over a new leaf with a fresh start. It was all an act. I know they tried to distract us from that by him saving Violet's life, but we all knew that wasn't going to be it. But once they got to Erasure, I very much enjoyed the lessons and training sessions, especially the individual ones with Violet and Felix. But I did get frustrated that she didn't improve more quickly with her accuracy of the lightning strikes and targeting, because it didn't seem to, by the big battle at the end, although she was able to hit the wyverns sort of quite accurately, the venin, she wasn't able to necessarily target those. So I would very much like her to figure out a way to improve on her aim of her lightning. Overall, very fun, enjoyable. It didn't require much brain power, brain energy, which was a good thing for me. And I'm looking forward to going straight on to listening to Onyx Storm, the third book in the series. If you enjoyed this video, please consider going to gofundme.com/SaveJenny to see why I'm fundraising for urgent neurosurgery. I'm grateful for any donations. Thank you.